The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen plains of northern Nevada, and Beatrice Ashford knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here with her baby pressed against her chest. January 1882 had brought the worst blizzard in living memory, and her husband had left her on the side of the road 3 hours ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and their 6-month-old daughter wrapped in a thin blanket. He had looked at her with those cold eyes and told her he never wanted a family anyway, that she had trapped him, and then he had ridden off toward California without looking back. The wagon tracks were already buried under 2 feet of fresh snow, and Beatrice could no longer feel her feet inside her worn leather boots. Her daughter, little Emma, had stopped crying an hour ago, and that silence terrified Beatrice more than anything else in her 22 years of life. She stumbled forward through the white emptiness, her dark hair plastered to her face with snow and ice, her fingers so numb she could barely maintain her grip on the baby. The landscape offered nothing but endless white in every direction. No shelter, no trees, nothing but the relentless wind and the snow that seemed determined to bury them both. Beatrice tried to pray, but the words would not come. She had been raised to believe that God watched over the faithful, but where was he now when she needed him most? Her former husband had seemed like such a good man when they married 2 years ago in Missouri, but the journey west had revealed his true nature, his cruelty, his inability to love anyone but himself. She had ignored the warning signs, the way he would disappear for days at a time, the way he looked at their daughter with something close to resentment. The world tilted suddenly, and Beatrice realized she was falling. She twisted her body at the last moment to protect Emma, landing hard on her side in a snowdrift. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and for several long seconds she could not breathe. When she finally gasped in a breath, the cold air burned her throat and lungs. She tried to stand, but her legs would not obey. This was it, then. This was how it ended. She pulled Emma closer, tucking the baby inside her coat, and closed her eyes against the stinging snow. At least they would be together. She did not know how long she lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, before she heard the sound of hoofbeats. At first she thought she was dreaming or hallucinating, but then a voice cut through the wind, deep and urgent and blessedly real. Jesus Christ, there is someone out here. Strong hands lifted her from the snow, and Beatrice forced her eyes open to see a man's face above her, mostly hidden by a thick scarf and a wide-brimmed hat covered in snow. His eyes were gray like the storm clouds, but they held concern rather than coldness. She tried to speak, to tell him about Emma, but her lips would not form words. "I've got you," the man said, and his voice was steady despite the howling wind. "I have got you both." He had seen Emma then. Relief flooded through Beatrice as the man lifted them both with surprising ease. She was aware of movement, of being placed on a horse, of the man mounting behind her and wrapping something warm around them both. A heavy coat, she realized dimly, lined with fur. The horse began to move, and the man held them securely in place with one strong arm while guiding the horse with the other. "Stay awake," he commanded, his voice close to her ear. "We are not far from my place. Stay awake and keep that baby warm." Beatrice tried to obey, tried to focus on anything but the cold and the exhaustion, but darkness kept creeping in at the edges of her vision. She felt Emma move slightly against her chest and took comfort in that small sign of life. The man kept talking, a steady stream of words that she could not quite follow but which helped anchor her to consciousness. He spoke about his horse, about the storm, about how lucky they were that he had decided to check his northern fence line before the weather got worse. Time lost all meaning in the white void, but eventually shapes began to emerge from the snow. Buildings, she realized. A barn, a house, other structures she could not identify. The horse stopped and the man dismounted, then carefully lifted Beatrice and Emma down. He carried them toward the house, kicking the door open with his boot, and suddenly they were inside, out of the wind and the cold. The change was so dramatic that Beatrice gasped. "Let me see the baby," the man said, laying Beatrice on a sofa near a fireplace where a low fire still burned. He unwrapped Emma from her blankets with careful hands, and Beatrice watched anxiously as he examined her daughter. Emma's lips had a bluish tinge and she was not moving much, but her eyes were open and she was breathing. "She is cold, but I think she will be all right," the man said. He looked at Beatrice with those gray eyes, and she could see his face properly now. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble and a scar across his left eyebrow. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but there was kindness in it, a softness around the eyes that contradicted his rough appearance. "Are you hurt anywhere besides the cold?" Beatrice shook her head, then found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Thank you. Thank you for saving us." "What the hell were you doing out in this storm?" he asked, building up the fire until it roared in the hearth. "Nobody with any sense would be traveling in this weather." "My husband," Beatrice managed, and saying the word felt like swallowing broken glass. "He left us. On the road. Said he never wanted us." The man went very still, his hand frozen in the act of adding another log to the fire. When he turned to look at her, his expression had hardened into something dangerous. "He left you, in this blizzard, with a baby." "Yes," Beatrice whispered, and to her shame, tears began to slide down her frozen cheeks. "Please, I need to warm Emma. She has been so quiet." The man's expression softened immediately. "Of course. Let me get some warm water and clean blankets. I am going to need to check you both more carefully once you have warmed up a bit." He paused, then added, "My name is Thomas Kendrick. This is my ranch about 10 miles north of Elko." "Beatrice Ashford," she replied, "and this is Emma." Thomas nodded and disappeared into another room, returning moments later with an armful of blankets and a basin of warm water. He helped Beatrice sit up and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then gently took Emma and began to warm the baby's hands and feet with a damp cloth. His movements were confident and careful, and Beatrice found herself wondering if he had children of his own. "Is your wife here?" she asked, looking around the well-kept but clearly masculine space. "No wife," Thomas replied without looking up from his task. "It is just me out here. I have a couple of ranch hands, but I sent them to town yesterday before the storm hit. Figured they would be safer there." He glanced at her. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. I will put some water on the stove for you to wash up, and I have some clean shirts that will work as a nightgown for now. Your dress is soaked through." Beatrice nodded, too exhausted to feel embarrassed. Thomas was right, and besides, he had already saved their lives. He set Emma back in Beatrice's arms, now wrapped in warm, dry blankets, and disappeared again. Beatrice held her daughter close and whispered nonsense words to her, relieved to see some color returning to Emma's cheeks. The baby made a small sound, almost a whimper, and Beatrice felt tears of relief sting her eyes. Thomas returned with a kettle of warm water, a clean shirt, and a pair of wool socks. "The bedroom is through there," he said, pointing to a door on the left. "Take your time. I will watch the baby if you want." Beatrice hesitated. She had only just met this man, and the last man she had trusted had abandoned her to die in a blizzard. But she could see genuine concern in Thomas's eyes, and Emma seemed comfortable in the warm blankets. Finally, she nodded and carefully transferred Emma to his arms. The sight of this rough cowboy holding her tiny daughter with such gentleness made something twist in Beatrice's chest. In the bedroom, Beatrice peeled off her frozen dress, her petticoat, everything down to her skin. Her body was mottled with red and white patches where the cold had affected her most severely, and her feet were alarmingly pale. She washed quickly with the warm water, hissing as sensation began to return to her extremities. The pain was intense, but she welcomed it as a sign that she was still alive. She pulled on Thomas's shirt, which fell to her knees and smelled faintly of sage and leather, and the wool socks, which were absurdly large on her small feet. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Thomas sitting by the fire with Emma cradled in one arm while he stirred something in a pot with his free hand. "Soup," he explained. "Nothing fancy, just beef and vegetables, but it will warm you up from the inside. When did you last eat?" Beatrice tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, I think, before we broke camp." Thomas's jaw tightened again, but he said nothing. He ladled soup into a bowl and handed it to her, then carefully returned Emma to her arms. Beatrice ate with one hand, trying not to wolf down the food despite her desperate hunger. The soup was simple but delicious, rich and hot, and exactly what her body needed. She could feel strength slowly returning to her limbs. "You were headed to California?" Thomas asked, settling into a chair across from her. "We were," Beatrice said. "My husband, William, he had heard there was money to be made in the logging camps, but he changed somewhere along the way. He started drinking more, started saying terrible things about Emma, about how she cried too much and held us back." She paused, staring into the fire. "This morning he told me to walk off the trail to relieve myself. I took Emma with me because she needed changing. When I came back, he had turned the wagon around and was already moving. I ran after him, calling for him to stop, but he just kept going. Finally, he stopped long enough to throw out my bag and tell me he was done playing father to a screaming brat. Then he left." "Son of a bitch," Thomas muttered. "Pardon my language, but that is what he is. No man abandons his wife and child. No real man, anyway." "I walked for hours trying to find shelter," Beatrice continued. "I thought maybe I could make it to a town, but I did not know where I was or which direction to go. Everything looked the same in the snow." "You were walking in circles," Thomas said gently. "I found you about 2 miles from where the main road runs. If you had kept going the direction you were headed, you would have walked straight into the mountains." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "But you are safe now. You and Emma both. You can stay here until the storm passes and you figure out what you want to do next." Beatrice felt fresh tears well up. "I cannot pay you. I have nothing. William took everything." "I am not asking for payment," Thomas said firmly. "You need help, and I am in a position to give it. That is all there is to it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the hearth. Emma had fallen asleep in Beatrice's arms, her breathing steady and even, and Beatrice felt her own eyes growing heavy. She tried to fight it, but exhaustion was winning. "Sleep," Thomas said softly. "You are safe here. I will keep the fire going and watch over you both." "I cannot take your bed," Beatrice protested weakly. "You are not. I will sleep out here by the fire. The bedroom is yours for as long as you need it." When Beatrice tried to argue, he held up a hand. "I am not debating this. You have been through hell today and you need proper rest. Go on now." Beatrice did not have the energy to argue further. She carried Emma into the bedroom and found that Thomas had already turned down the bed and added extra blankets. She laid Emma in the center of the bed, surrounded by pillows so she could not roll off, then crawled in beside her. The mattress was soft and the blankets were warm, and within minutes, Beatrice was asleep. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and panicking until she remembered where she was. Each time she would check on Emma, relieved to find her daughter sleeping peacefully, her color good and her breathing regular. Once, when Beatrice got up to check the main room, she found Thomas sitting in the chair by the fire, clearly awake and alert. He nodded to her but said nothing, and she returned to bed feeling oddly comforted by his vigilant presence. When morning came, Beatrice woke to the sound of movement in the main room and the smell of coffee. She sat up carefully, checking Emma, who was awake and making the small hungry sounds that meant she would start crying soon if she was not fed. Beatrice nursed her daughter, grateful that at least this was something she could still provide, and then ventured out into the main room. Thomas was at the stove, cooking something that smelled wonderful. He turned when he heard her and offered a small smile. "Morning. Storm has not let up yet. Looks like we are stuck here for at least another day or two." "I am sorry to be such an imposition," Beatrice said. "You are not," Thomas replied firmly. He gestured to the table where he had set out plates and cups. "Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." Beatrice obeyed, settling Emma in her lap. The baby looked around with wide eyes, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Thomas served up plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, then poured coffee for both of them. The food was simple but well prepared, and Beatrice found herself eating with better appetite than she had in months. "You are a good cook," she said. Thomas shrugged. "You learn when you live alone. Either that or you starve." He sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of his cup. "I have been thinking about your situation. When the storm breaks, you are going to need to decide what you want to do. Do you have family you can go to?" Beatrice shook her head. "My parents died 5 years ago. I have a brother in St. Louis, but I have not heard from him in over a year. I do not even know if he is still there." "What about your husband's family?" "His parents disowned him when he decided to go west. They did not approve of the marriage or of him leaving Massachusetts." Beatrice looked down at Emma. "I have no money, no resources, nothing but the clothes in my bag if they are even still wearable after being soaked." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have a proposition for you." Beatrice looked up, wary. She had learned the hard way that propositions from men were rarely innocent. Thomas must have seen something in her expression because he quickly said, "Nothing improper. I am talking about work. This ranch is more than I can handle alone, especially with calving season coming up. I need help with the house, the cooking, the basic upkeep. My ranch hands take care of the heavy labor, but there is plenty else that needs doing. You could stay on as my housekeeper. Room and board plus a small salary. It would give you time to figure out your next step, save some money, and Emma would have a warm, safe place to grow." Beatrice stared at him. "You would do that? For a stranger?" "You are not a stranger anymore," Thomas said simply. "You are someone who needs help, and I am someone who can provide it. Besides, I am not being entirely selfless here. I really do need the help, and it would be nice to have decent cooking and a clean house for once." "I am a hard worker," Beatrice said quickly. "I can cook and clean and mend and do laundry. I kept house for my parents before they died, and I managed our household when William and I were still happy. I can earn my keep." "I do not doubt it," Thomas said. "So is that a yes?" Beatrice looked down at Emma, who was reaching for the sunlight streaming through the window, her tiny fingers opening and closing. What choice did she have, really? She could try to make it to Elko and find work there, but who would hire a woman with an infant? At least here she would have shelter and food, and Thomas seemed like a decent man. She would have to trust her instincts, hope that she was not making another terrible mistake. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I will stay and work for you. Thank you, Mr. Kendrick." "Thomas," he corrected. "Just Thomas. We are going to be living under the same roof. Might as well dispense with the formalities." "Then you should call me Beatrice." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and softer. "Beatrice it is." The storm raged for 2 more days, keeping them trapped inside the house. Thomas proved to be surprisingly good company. He was quiet by nature, but when he did speak, he was thoughtful and often funny in a dry, understated way. He told Beatrice about growing up in Texas, about how he had saved every penny from years of working other men's ranches, until he could afford to buy this land 3 years ago. He spoke about his plans for the ranch, about building a herd and making a real success of the place. He had lost both his parents to cholera when he was 16 and had been on his own ever since. In turn, Beatrice told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and her brother, about how she had met William at a church social and been swept away by his charm, and his grand plans for their future. She admitted that she had ignored the warning signs, the small cruelties and selfishnesses that should have told her what kind of man he really was. Thomas listened without judgment, and Beatrice found herself grateful for his steady, calming presence. Emma took to Thomas with surprising ease. The baby would watch him with solemn eyes as he moved around the house, and when he spoke to her in his low, gentle voice, she would coo and wave her arms. Once, when Beatrice was preparing dinner, Thomas had picked Emma up and walked her around the room, pointing out the window at the snow and telling her stories about his horse, Charlie, and the cattle that were probably hunkered down in the barn right now waiting out the storm. Beatrice had watched them from the corner of her eye, something warm and complicated stirring in her chest. On the 3rd morning, Beatrice woke to silence. The wind had stopped. She got up and looked out the window to see a world transformed. The storm had passed, leaving behind several feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the morning sunlight. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, and the air had that peculiar stillness that follows a major storm. Thomas was already up, dressed in heavy work clothes and preparing to go check on the animals. "I need to dig out the barn and make sure the cattle are all right," he said. "There is plenty of food in the pantry if you get hungry. I will probably be out there most of the day." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Beatrice asked. "Just keep the fire going and keep warm," Thomas said. He paused at the door, looking back at her. "I am glad you are here, Beatrice. I am glad I found you." Then he was gone, and Beatrice was left alone with Emma and her own confused feelings. She busied herself with cleaning the house, which did not really need it, and preparing a large pot of stew for dinner. Emma was content to lie on a blanket near the fire, playing with a carved wooden horse that Thomas had given her. Every so often, Beatrice would look out the window and see Thomas working, shoveling snow, hauling hay, moving with the easy competence of someone who had been doing this kind of work his entire life. When he came in that evening, stamping snow from his boots and pulling off his gloves, he looked exhausted but satisfied. "The cattle are fine. Lost a few chickens, but that is to be expected. I will need to ride into Elko tomorrow to let my ranch hands know it is safe to come back, and to report finding you. The sheriff will want to know about your husband abandoning you like that." Beatrice felt her stomach twist with anxiety. "Will they try to find him?" "Probably not," Thomas admitted. "He did not break any laws technically. A man can leave his wife if he wants to, even if it makes him lower than a snake's belly. But it should be documented in case you need to file for divorce or anything like that." Divorce. Beatrice had not even thought that far ahead, but of course Thomas was right. She would need to legally end her marriage to William if she ever wanted to move on with her life. The thought was both frightening and liberating. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Thomas saddled Charlie and prepared to ride into Elko, promising to return by evening. "Will you be all right here alone?" he asked. "I will be fine," Beatrice assured him. I have Emma and the fire and plenty to keep me busy." He nodded and rode off, and Beatrice spent the day settling into her new role. She did laundry, hanging it to dry on lines Thomas had strung near the fire. She baked bread, the yeasty smell filling the house. She mended a tear in one of Thomas's shirts and polished his boots. The work was familiar and comforting, and she found herself humming as she worked. Thomas returned just as the sun was setting, accompanied by two men on horseback. He introduced them as his ranch hands, Pete and Sam, both weathered cowboys in their 40s who tipped their hats to Beatrice and made no comment about her presence. They stayed only long enough to discuss work schedules and then headed to the bunkhouse. "The sheriff said to come by his office next week," Thomas told Beatrice as they ate dinner. "He will take your statement and make an official record. He also said to tell you that there is a church group in Elko that helps women in difficult situations, if you need anything." "I have everything I need right here," Beatrice said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. In just a few short days, this house had begun to feel like a home in a way that the wagon with William never had. The weeks passed quickly. January gave way to February, and the snow began to melt. Beatrice settled into a comfortable routine, managing the household while Thomas and his ranch hands worked the land. Emma grew stronger and more alert, her blue eyes watching everything with intense curiosity. She started to recognize Thomas, smiling and reaching for him when he came in from work. He always stopped to talk to her, his voice going soft and gentle in a way that made Beatrice's heart ache. She tried not to think about the feelings that were growing inside her. Thomas was her employer and her savior, nothing more. It would be foolish and presumptuous to imagine anything else. But she could not help noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the gentleness of his hands, or the way he always made sure she and Emma had everything they needed before he saw to his own comfort. He was nothing like William. Thomas was steady and kind and utterly reliable. One evening in late February, after Emma had been put to bed, Beatrice and Thomas sat by the fire as had become their custom. Thomas was repairing a bridle, and Beatrice was knitting a blanket for Emma. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. "I have been thinking," Thomas said suddenly, "about your situation." Beatrice's hand stilled on the knitting needles. "What about it? You have been here over a month now, and it is working out well. Better than well, actually. The house has never been this clean or this comfortable, and I cannot remember the last time I ate this good. Pete and Sam are happy too, now that there is decent food and clean clothes. What I am trying to say is, I would like you to stay on permanently. Not just until you figure out your next step, but for as long as you want." Relief flooded through Beatrice. She had been worrying about what would happen when spring came fully and the trails opened up again. "I would like that," she said softly. "Emma and I, we are happy here. Happier than I have been in a long time." Thomas looked up from the bridle, his gray eyes meeting hers. "I am glad. I have gotten used to having you both here. The house feels empty when you are not in it." There was something in his voice, something that made Beatrice's pulse quicken. But before she could respond, Emma started crying from the bedroom, and the moment was broken. Beatrice hurried to tend to her daughter, and when she returned, Thomas had gone back to working on the bridle, his expression unreadable. March brought the first real hints of spring. The snow melted to reveal brown grass and muddy ground, and the days grew noticeably longer. Thomas was busy with calving, and Beatrice often did not see him from dawn until well after dark. When he did come in, he was exhausted, eating quickly and falling asleep in his chair by the fire. Beatrice would cover him with a blanket and leave him there, not having the heart to wake him. One particularly difficult night, a cow was having trouble delivering her calf. Thomas came to the house at midnight, his face drawn with worry. "I need help," he said. "The calf is breech, and I cannot turn it alone. Pete and Sam have gone to check the south pasture. Can you help?" Beatrice had never assisted with an animal birth before, but she did not hesitate. She bundled Emma up and brought her to the barn, settling her in a nest of clean hay where she could keep an eye on her. Then she rolled up her sleeves and followed Thomas's instructions, holding the cow steady while he worked to turn the calf. It was hard, messy work, and the cow bellowed in distress, but finally Thomas managed to get the calf positioned correctly. Minutes later, a healthy bull calf slid into the world, and the mother cow immediately began to clean him. Beatrice sat back on her heels, covered in blood and birthing fluid, and started to laugh. Thomas looked at her in surprise, then started laughing too. They sat there in the barn, laughing like fools while the new calf struggled to his feet and Emma slept peacefully in her nest of hay. "Thank you," Thomas said when they had both caught their breath. "I could not have done that without you." "We make a good team," Beatrice replied, and then blushed, realizing how that might sound, but Thomas just smiled. "Yes," he said softly, "we do." They walked back to the house together in the pre-dawn light, Emma in Beatrice's arms and a new understanding humming in the air between them. At the door, Thomas stopped and turned to her. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I have feelings for you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it is too soon, and I know you have been through hell with your husband, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable. But I cannot keep pretending that you are just my housekeeper. You are more than that. You and Emma both. You have become everything to me." Beatrice stared at him, her mind reeling. "Thomas, You do not have to say anything right now," he continued. "I just needed you to know I will wait as long as you need. Hell, I will wait forever if that is what it takes, but I had to be honest with you." "I have feelings for you too," Beatrice said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I have tried to tell myself it is just gratitude or that it is too soon after William. But it is not. It is real. You are nothing like him. You are kind and gentle and good, and you make me feel safe in a way I have never felt before." Thomas took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," Beatrice whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, and when they pulled apart, Beatrice felt tears on her cheeks. "I am sorry," she said. "I do not know why I am crying." "Because you have been carrying too much alone for too long," Thomas said, brushing the tears away with his thumb. "But you do not have to do that anymore. I am here. I will be here for as long as you want me." "I want you forever," Beatrice said, and knew with absolute certainty that it was true. They stood there on the porch as the sun rose, holding each other while Emma slept between them, and Beatrice felt something inside her that had been broken begin to heal. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Beatrice's life. She and Thomas moved cautiously at first, stealing kisses when Emma was napping and holding hands by the fire in the evenings. But the connection between them was undeniable and grew stronger with each passing day. Thomas was patient and considerate, always making sure Beatrice was comfortable and never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. He treated Emma as if she were his own daughter, playing with her and making her laugh with silly faces and songs. In early April, Thomas rode into Elko to speak with the sheriff about Beatrice's marriage. He returned with news that William had been spotted in California, working in a logging camp and apparently telling people he was unmarried. The sheriff had sent word to a judge he knew, and with William's abandonment documented and his current whereabouts known, it would be relatively simple to file for divorce on grounds of desertion. "It will take a few months," Thomas explained, But by summer, you should be free of him legally." Beatrice felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "And then what?" she asked, though she thought she knew. Thomas took her hand. "And then I would like to ask you to marry me, properly with a proposal and a ring and everything. I want to make you my wife, Beatrice. I want to adopt Emma and give her my name. I want us to be a real family." "We are already a real family," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "But yes, when I am free, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." He pulled her into his arms, and they held each other while Emma played at their feet, babbling happily to herself. The spring work kept them all busy. Beatrice planted a vegetable garden near the house, and Emma learned to sit up on her own, then to crawl. The ranch hands, Pete and Sam, had warmed to Beatrice and treated her with respect and friendliness. They doted on Emma, carving her toys and telling her stories when they came to the house for meals. In May, a letter arrived from a judge in Carson City. Beatrice's divorce had been granted. William had not contested it and had apparently been relieved to be free of his obligations. Beatrice felt nothing but relief. That part of her life was over, and she could finally move forward. Thomas proposed that evening, kneeling in front of her with a simple gold band he had bought on one of his trips to Elko. "Beatrice Ashford, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you and Emma with everything I have, to provide for you and protect you, to be the husband and father you both deserve." "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in June in a simple ceremony in Elko, with Pete and Sam serving as witnesses and the preacher's wife holding Emma during the vows. Beatrice wore a new dress of blue calico, and Thomas wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly trimmed and his face cleanly shaven. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Thomas kissed her so sweetly that several of the townswomen in attendance sighed audibly. The wedding night was everything Beatrice had hoped for, and nothing like her first marriage. Thomas was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt cherished and desired. They made love slowly in the big bed in Thomas's room, which was now their room, and afterward they lay tangled together, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. "I want more children," Thomas said, his hand resting on her stomach. "If you do, I mean. I want Emma to have brothers and sisters." "I want that too," Beatrice said. "I want this house to be filled with children and laughter." "It will be," Thomas promised. "We will make it happen." Summer passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Beatrice took to ranch life as if she had been born to it, learning to help with the animals and managing the household with easy efficiency. Emma celebrated her first birthday in July, taking her first wobbly steps between Thomas and Beatrice while Pete and Sam cheered. Thomas officially adopted her in August, and Emma Ashford became Emma Kendrick in the eyes of the law. In September, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. Thomas was overjoyed, picking her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." The pregnancy was easier than her first had been, perhaps because Beatrice was no longer trapped in a wagon with a man who resented her. She bloomed under Thomas's attentive care, and even the morning sickness could not dampen her happiness. Thomas fretted over her constantly, insisting she rest more and not overwork herself. She humored him because she knew his concern came from a place of love. Emma was walking steadily now and starting to say a few words. Her favorite was Papa, which made Thomas melt every time she said it. Beatrice would watch them together and marvel at how far they had all come. A year ago, she had been freezing to death in a blizzard, abandoned and hopeless. Now she had a home, a husband who loved her, and a family that was growing, Winter came again, but this time Beatrice welcomed it. The house was warm and snug, well stocked with food and firewood. On cold evenings, they would sit by the fire as a family, Emma playing with her toys while Beatrice knitted baby clothes and Thomas read aloud from books he had bought in town. Sometimes he would read poetry, his deep voice turning the words into music, and Beatrice would rest her head on his shoulder and feel completely content. The baby came in early April, after a long but uncomplicated labor. Thomas held Beatrice's hand through all of it, whispering encouragement and promises. When the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Beatrice's arms, she looked down at her son and felt her heart expand impossibly. "A boy," Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names but never quite decided. Thomas looked at the baby for a long moment, then said, "James, after my father." "James Kendrick," Beatrice said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Emma, now almost 2, was fascinated by her new brother. She would sit beside Beatrice and gently pat the baby's head, saying "baby, baby" in her high, sweet voice. Thomas watched his family with such love in his eyes that it sometimes took Beatrice's breath away. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Thomas hired another ranch hand and built a second barn to accommodate the expanding herd. Beatrice managed the household and tended to the children, but she also found time to help with the ranch work when needed. She learned to ride a horse properly and even helped with the branding one year, earning approving nods from Pete and Sam. The years passed, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Emma grew into a bright, curious child with her mother's dark hair and Thomas's gray eyes. James was more serious and thoughtful, but he had his father's way with animals and was often found in the barn with the horses. In 1885, Beatrice gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca, who kept the entire household running ragged with their energy and mischief. By 1888, the Kendrick Ranch was one of the most successful in the area. Thomas had built a reputation as an honest dealer and a fair employer. Beatrice was known throughout Elko as a kind, capable woman who never forgot where she had come from and was always willing to help others in need. Their house was always open to travelers who needed a hot meal or a place to stay, and Beatrice made it a point to keep an eye out for women in difficult situations, remembering her own desperate circumstances. One cold January evening in 1889, 7 years after that terrible blizzard, Beatrice stood on the porch of their house and looked out at the snowy landscape. Thomas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how much has changed," Beatrice said. 7 years ago, I was dying in the snow, convinced that Emma and I would not survive the night. And now look at us. We have this beautiful home, 4 healthy children, and a life I never could have imagined." "I think about that day sometimes too," Thomas admitted. "About how close I came to not checking the fence line that day. If I had waited even a few more hours, I would not have found you. I would have missed out on all of this." "I am so grateful you found us," Beatrice said, turning in his arms to face him. "You saved our lives, Thomas, not just that night but every day since. You gave us a home and a family and love. You gave us everything." "You gave me just as much," Thomas said, cupping her face in his hands. "Before you came, I had a house and a ranch, but I did not have a home. I did not have a reason to work this hard or dream this big. You and the children, you are my purpose. You are my everything." They kissed as the snow began to fall, soft and gentle, nothing like the killing blizzard that had brought them together. From inside the house came the sound of children laughing and playing, and Beatrice smiled against Thomas's lips. "We should go in," she said, "before the children destroy something." "In a minute," Thomas said, holding her close. "I just want to stand here with you for one more minute and appreciate how lucky I am." They stood together on the porch, watching the snow fall and listening to the happy sounds of their family. Beatrice thought about William sometimes, wondered if he ever regretted his cruelty. But those thoughts came less and less frequently as the years passed. He was part of her past, but Thomas and their children were her present and her future. Life on the ranch continued to flourish. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman who had inherited her mother's strength and her father's kindness. She helped Beatrice with the household and was particularly good with the younger children. James became his father's right hand, learning everything he could about ranching and showing a natural talent for it. The twins, Sarah and Rebecca, were inseparable and kept everyone entertained with their antics. In 1892, when Emma was 10, a young family arrived at the ranch in desperate circumstances, their wagon broken down and their supplies exhausted. Beatrice took them in immediately, remembering her own desperate need all those years ago. Thomas repaired their wagon and gave them provisions, and the family stayed for a week before continuing on their journey west. The mother thanked Beatrice with tears in her eyes, saying she did not know what they would have done without their help. "You would have survived," Beatrice told her. "You are stronger than you think, but I am glad we could help ease your way." After they left, Thomas found Beatrice in the garden and pulled her into his arms. "You have such a big heart," he said. "It is one of the things I love most about you." "I cannot forget what it is like to be desperate and afraid," Beatrice said. "If we can help others, we should." "We will always help," Thomas promised. "As long as I have breath in my body and food in the pantry, no one will leave this ranch hungry or without hope." They continued that tradition for the rest of their lives, becoming known throughout the region as people who would help anyone in need. Their children grew up understanding the importance of compassion and generosity, and they carried those lessons into their own lives. Emma married a young rancher from a neighboring property when she was 19, and Thomas walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. "You will always be my first daughter," he told her. "Nothing will ever change that." James took over more and more of the ranch operations as Thomas got older, showing the same dedication and integrity his father had always displayed. The twins, now young women themselves, were both courting respectable young men from Elko, and Beatrice suspected she would have 2 more weddings to plan soon. In 1896, Beatrice and Thomas celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. The children threw them a party, and neighbors came from miles around to join in the celebration. As Beatrice looked around at the crowd gathered in their home, at the children and grandchildren and friends, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Beatrice and Thomas sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The summer air was warm and filled with the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "You ever think about that blizzard?" Beatrice asked. "All the time," Thomas said. "Best thing that ever happened to me finding you that day." "It was the worst day of my life and the best day of my life all at once," Beatrice said. "William abandoning us was terrible, but it led me to you. Sometimes I think everything happens for a reason." "I do not know about that," Thomas said thoughtfully. "What William did was cruel and wrong, and there is no excuse for it. But I am grateful that you ended up here with me. I cannot imagine my life without you." "You will never have to," Beatrice said, taking his hand. "We have built something beautiful here, Thomas. Not just this ranch, but this family, this love. It will outlast both of us." "It will," Thomas agreed. "The children will carry it forward and their children after them." The legacy we are leaving is not just land and cattle. It is love and kindness and the knowledge that family is not just about blood. It is about choice and commitment. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars come out one by one. Inside, Emma was staying the night with her husband and their new baby, Thomas and Beatrice's first grandchild. James was in the bunkhouse, probably talking with the ranch hands about the next day's work. The twins were in their room, no doubt whispering and giggling the way they always did. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as years always do. Thomas's hair went gray, and lines appeared on Beatrice's face, but the love between them never dimmed. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They celebrated births and mourned losses. They worked hard and played harder, always making time for each other and for their ever-expanding family. In the winter of 1902, 20 years after that fateful blizzard, a storm came through that reminded everyone of that terrible season. Beatrice stood at the window watching the snow fall, and Thomas came to stand beside her. "Worried?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "Storms like this always make me remember." "We are safe," Thomas said, wrapping his arms around her. "We are warm and fed and together. Nothing can touch us here." And he was right. They weathered that storm and many others, always together, always supporting each other. Their love became legendary in the area, a story that people told as an example of how good could come from even the darkest circumstances. On a spring day in 1910, Beatrice sat on the porch with Thomas, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Emma, now a mother of 4 herself, sat beside Beatrice, and James stood behind his father's chair. The twins, both married with families of their own, were organizing the chaos of children running around the yard. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," one of the older grandchildren asked. "Tell us about how you and Grandpa met." Beatrice looked at Thomas, and he smiled and nodded. So she told the story, the way she had told it many times before. She told them about the blizzard and the abandonment, about the cold and the fear. She told them about Thomas finding her and bringing her to safety, about his kindness and his offer of shelter and work. She told them about falling in love and building a life together. "And the moral of the story," she finished, "is that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what we really need." "And what we really needed was each other," Thomas added, squeezing her hand. The children were satisfied with the story, and they ran off to play. Beatrice and Thomas sat together, watching their legacy run and play and laugh. They had built something that would last long after they were gone, something strong and good and full of love. "I would go through it all again," Beatrice said suddenly. "All the pain and fear and cold, I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "You will never have to," Thomas said. "But I understand what you mean. Every hardship, every struggle, it was all worth it to have this life with you." As the sun set over the Nevada landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Beatrice leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder and closed her eyes. She was 60 years old now, and Thomas was 63. They had lived a full, rich life together, and they were not done yet. There were still more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to spoil, more memories to make. But even if their time together ended tomorrow, Beatrice knew she had been blessed beyond measure. She had been saved from death by a kind cowboy who became the love of her life. She had been given a second chance, and she had made the most of it. And when their time finally came, she and Thomas would leave behind a legacy of love that would continue for generations. For now, though, they simply sat together on the porch, holding hands and watching their family. The blizzard that had almost killed her had instead given her everything she had ever wanted. She had been abandoned with her child. A cowboy had said he would be father and shelter both, and he had kept that promise every single day since. And they all lived happily ever after, their love story becoming part of the legend of the West, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, love and kindness could not only survive but thrive. The Kendrick Ranch continued to prosper for many years, always known as a place of warmth and welcome, where no one in need was ever turned away. And at the heart of it all was the love between Beatrice and Thomas, a love born in a blizzard and forged in the fire of commitment and devotion, a love that proved stronger than any storm.